In April 1814, the most powerful man in Europe, a figure who had redrawn the map of the continent, signed his abdication. He was sent into exile on a tiny Mediterranean island called Elba, home to fewer than 12,000 people. It seemed like the end of an era, but less than a year later, he returned. He landed in France, marched all the way to Paris, and reclaimed his throne without his old army firing a single shot to stop him. In fact, they joined him. If you value real documented history, hit that like button and subscribe, because today we're retelling the true story of how Napoleon Bonaparte survived exile and engineered one of the most audacious comebacks in history, the dramatic episode known as the 100 Days. This isn't a legend. Every part of this story is documented. So, how did we get here? By 1813, Napoleon's once invincible empire was crumbling. His catastrophic invasion of Russia in 1812 had been a turning point, costing him the core of his legendary Grande Armée. The following year, in October 1813, he suffered another crushing defeat at the massive Battle of Leipzig, also known as the Battle of Nations. The tide had turned against him. In early 1814, the Allied powers Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Great Britain formed the Sixth Coalition and invaded France itself. The fighting was fierce, but Napoleon's resources were stretched thin. On March 31, 1814, the unthinkable happened. Paris, the heart of his empire, fell to the Allies. With his marshals refusing to continue the fight, Napoleon had no choice. On April 6th, at the Palace of Fontainebleau, he abdicated the throne. The Allies needed to decide what to do with him. The solution came in the form of the Treaty of Fontainebleau. It granted Napoleon sovereignty over Elba, a small island off the coast of Italy. He was even allowed to keep his title of emperor, but his empire was now just this tiny speck in the Mediterranean. Back in France, the Bourbon monarchy was restored, with King Louis XVIII, the brother of the executed Louis XVI, taking the throne. Across Europe, there was a collective sigh of relief. The Napoleonic Wars, which had ravaged the continent for over a decade, were finally over. Or so they thought. Napoleon arrived on Elba in May 1814. For a man used to ruling an entire continent, you might think he'd sink into despair. But that wasn't his style. True to form, he immediately got to work. He acted like the emperor he still was, completely reorganizing the island's administration, reforming its struggling economy, building new roads, and even personally overseeing the development of its iron mines. He was a whirlwind of energy, turning Elba into his personal project. But beneath the surface, his situation was precarious. The newly restored French government was supposed to pay him a substantial annual income as part of the treaty, but the payments were delayed and eventually stopped. This left him financially strained. More importantly, he was hearing troubling news from the mainland. In France, dissatisfaction with the new king, Louis XVIII, was growing rapidly. Many people, especially the veterans of the Grande Armée, felt ignored and disrespected by the new regime. The king's court was filled with old aristocrats who had returned from exile, and they often looked down on the achievements of the past 20 years. The spirit of the revolution seemed to be fading. Meanwhile, in Austria, the great powers of Europe were gathered at the Congress of Vienna. Their goal was to redraw the map of Europe and create a new balance of power to prevent another continental war. From his island exile, Napoleon watched all of this unfold. He saw the political squabbles between the Allies. He heard the whispers of discontent from France, and he sensed an opportunity. The game wasn't over yet. If you're finding this context helpful for understanding what happened next, do me a favor and hit that like button and share this video. It really helps us bring more real history to more people. With his mind made up, Napoleon decided to make his move. On the evening of February 26, 1815, under the cover of darkness, he slipped away from Elba. He had a small flotilla of ships carrying about 1,000 loyal men. After a few days at sea, he landed near Cannes on the southern coast of France on March 1st. His improbable journey back to power had begun. From the coast, he began marching north, taking a route through the Alps to avoid royalist strongholds. The news of his return sent shockwaves through France and across Europe. King Louis XVIII was in a panic. He immediately dispatched troops to intercept and arrest Napoleon. The first major confrontation happened on March 7th, near the city of Grenoble. Napoleon's small force came face to face with the 5th Regiment of the Line, soldiers of the French army sent to stop him. This was the moment of truth. What happened next is the stuff of legend, but it's backed by multiple contemporary accounts. Napoleon ordered his men to lower their weapons. He walked forward alone until he was within musket range of the royalist troops. He opened his coat and famously declared, "Soldiers of the 5th, I am your emperor. If there is any man among you who would shoot his emperor, here I am." There was a stunned silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, a cry went up, "Vive l'Empereur! Long live the emperor!" The soldiers threw down their white royalist cockades, rushed forward, and surrounded him, cheering. They hadn't fired a shot. They had joined him. This scene repeated itself all along his march to Paris. Regiment after regiment sent to stop him ended up switching their allegiance. His old general, Marshal Ney, who had promised the king he would bring Napoleon back in an iron cage, also defected with his entire army corps. The king's authority was evaporating. Seeing that his support had completely collapsed, Louis XVIII fled Paris on March 19th. One day later, on March 20th, 1815, Napoleon entered the Tuileries Palace in Paris and reclaimed his throne. He had gone from being a prisoner on a tiny island to the ruler of France once again, all in the space of 20 days, and all without a single major battle. This remarkable period, from his return to his final defeat, is what history calls the 100 Days. I have to ask, what do you think this was? Was it an act of unparalleled political genius? Or was it pure, reckless ambition? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The powers of Europe at the Congress of Vienna were absolutely horrified. They had just spent months trying to put the continent back together, and now their old nemesis was back. They refused to negotiate. On March 13th, even before he reached Paris, they declared Napoleon an outlaw, a public enemy. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia immediately formed the 7th Coalition, pledging to raise massive armies to remove him from power once and for all. Napoleon knew he was in a race against time. His only hope was to strike first, to defeat the coalition armies one by one before they could unite their full strength against him. He quickly raised a new army and marched north into what is now Belgium, where British and Prussian forces were gathering. In June 1815, the final camp began. On June 16th, Napoleon achieved what seemed like a promising victory at the Battle of Ligny, where he defeated a Prussian army commanded by the tough old general Gebhard von Blücher. He had successfully split his enemies. But 2 days later, on June 18th, 1815, everything came to a head. Near a small village called Waterloo, Napoleon faced the British-led Allied army, commanded by his great rival, Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. The Battle of Waterloo was a brutal day-long slugfest. For hours, the outcome hung in the balance. But late in the afternoon, the Prussians, who Napoleon thought were defeated and retreating, reappeared on the battlefield. Blücher had managed to rally his men and march to Wellington's aid. Their arrival turned the tide. By evening, Napoleon's Imperial Guard made a final, desperate charge, but it was broken. The French army collapsed into a chaotic retreat. The 100 days were over. Napoleon fled back to Paris, and realizing his political support was gone, abdicated for a second and final time on June 22, 1815. This time, the Allies were taking no chances. There would be no comfortable exile on an island near Europe. The British government decided his fate. They sent him to St. Helena, one of the most remote, isolated islands in the world, a volcanic rock in the middle of the South Atlantic Ocean, thousands of miles from anywhere. Escape was virtually impossible. He arrived on St. Helena in October 1815 and would spend the last 6 years of his life there as a prisoner, dictating his memoirs and reflecting on his incredible life. Napoleon Bonaparte died on May 5, 1821. The official autopsy, conducted by his British captors, recorded the cause of death as stomach cancer, a disease that had also claimed his father. He would never return to France again. Napoleon's return from Elba stands as one of the most extraordinary episodes in modern history. Think about it. He lost an empire, escaped from exile, reclaimed a throne, and then lost it all again in just a little over 3 months. And the great irony? His final crushing defeat at Waterloo, which ended his career, ushered in a period of relative peace in Europe. The balance of power established by his enemies held for nearly a century. His story is a powerful reminder that power can be fleeting and that even the most incredible momentum is not the same thing as destiny. If you appreciate real documentary-style history that goes beyond the headlines, please hit that like button, share this video with someone else who loves history, and make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the stories that shaped our world. Thanks for watching.